Игрушки закончились, вы все военные.
Никакого материального обеспечения, ровным счетом ничего.
What exactly is the thinking inside Russia as dissent and defeats mount?
30th January 2026, Kupiansk. Only 67 Russian soldiers remained alive inside the city. 25 kilometers of Ukrainian drone kill zone surrounding civilian neighborhoods. 88% of Russian assault units destroyed before reaching cover. This is not just a battlefield. This is a trap where civilians are left to rot. Families sleep beside stairwells because basements are packed with wounded soldiers. Hospitals ration diesel. Parents whisper curses at a war that stole heat, safety, and truth. Protection was promised. Abandonment was delivered. One word in the comments: defended or abandoned. Like, subscribe, stay here, because Kupiansk shows how this war consumes its own people first.
To understand what is happening in Kupiansk, we have to stop thinking in terms of front lines. There is no front line anymore. As of mid-January 2026, Ukrainian forces have established a continuous strike perimeter extending up to 25 kilometers from the city center. Inside that zone, the Russian movement has collapsed almost entirely. According to Ukrainian military assessments cited by multiple field reporters, 88% of Russian assault units attempting to enter the city are destroyed before reaching any form of cover. Russian units do not reach buildings. They do not establish firing positions. Most never make it past tree lines, riverbanks, or industrial outskirts. Drone strike footage reviewed by multiple outlets shows repeated patterns. Small Russian groups detected shortly after movement, followed by rapid engagement, often within 10 minutes of exposure. By January, the outcome was visible on the map. Fewer than 100 Russian soldiers remained alive inside Kupiansk, scattered in isolated pockets with no reliable supply lines. These were not organized units. They were remnants, cut off from command, low on ammunition, unable to rotate or evacuate wounded without triggering new strikes. Attempts to reinforce them have consistently failed. Russian command shifted tactics in early January, abandoning large assaults in favor of micro-infiltration groups of 5 to 10 soldiers. These teams were sent at night, in bad weather, along indirect routes. The result did not change. Ukrainian forces intercepted most groups before they reached shelter. In several documented cases, entire teams were neutralized without a single shot fired from the ground. The military failure has spilled directly into civilian life. Kupiansk is not a ghost city. Civilians remain inside the drone perimeter. As military movement became impossible, civilian infrastructure followed. Ambulance routes were disrupted. Utility repairs slowed or stopped entirely. Local water pumping schedules were reduced after fuel deliveries became unreliable. Residential basements, once shelters, filled with wounded soldiers, turning civilian spaces into ad hoc medical points. That shift carries consequences. When wounded troops are moved into apartment buildings, those buildings become military-adjacent targets. Civilians are no longer simply living in a war zone. They are living inside the battlefield geometry itself. This is the part the Kremlin does not address. Russian state media continues to speak of holding positions and localized resistance. But there are no positions left to hold. There is no corridor open for relief, no safe window for extraction. Kupiansk has become a closed system where every attempt to move, military or civilian, carries risk. The state promised protection. What it delivered was exposure. Kupiansk now functions as a warning rather than a stronghold. A city where technology has erased maneuver, where soldiers are sent into spaces they cannot survive, and where civilians absorb the consequences of decisions made far from the front. This is no longer a battle for territory. It is a demonstration of what happens when a war stops caring who is trapped inside it. By the second half of January, Kupiansk was no longer a contested city. It was a sealed environment. Movement inside the city shrank to isolated pockets measured in meters, not blocks. Russian units that remained were not maneuvering. They were hiding. Local Ukrainian reporting from late January described entire districts where no Russian unit had moved in daylight for over 72 consecutive hours. Any attempt to relocate, even a single squad, triggered immediate drone contact. In multiple documented cases, Russian soldiers were hit less than 3 minutes after leaving cover. Ukrainian drone operators now maintain continuous aerial presence across corridors stretching up to 25 kilometers around Kupiansk. The result is simple. Time no longer belongs to the attacker. Russian soldiers do not die because they advance. They die because they exist in exposed space. Captured footage reviewed by independent analysts shows a pattern repeating across the city's outskirts. Small Russian groups emerge from basements or drainage points, often without armored support. Within minutes, reconnaissance drones tag their position. Then, FPV drones arrive. Not one, but waves. 5 drones per target has become standard. In some cases, as many as 12. This has altered civilian life in a way Moscow never planned for. Apartment buildings near former Russian positions are now avoided entirely, not because of shelling, but because any heat signature near these locations attracts drone attention. Families who remained in Kupiansk report sleeping in hallways or stairwells, not basements, because basements are occupied by wounded soldiers, ammunition stockpiles, or command posts. In one verified account from mid-January, residents of a 5-story building reported losing water access for 36 hours after a Russian unit siphoned diesel intended for civilian generators to power communications equipment. When Ukrainian drones struck the unit, the generator was destroyed along with the water pump. No replacement arrived. Hospitals are operating under similar strain. Field reports indicate that medical evacuations for Russian soldiers inside Kupiansk have dropped by more than 60% compared to December. Not due to fewer casualties, but because evacuation routes are too exposed. Wounded soldiers are being treated inside residential buildings, often without anesthesia, often without power. This is where the war becomes personal for civilians. Residents describe nights spent listening not to artillery, but to the constant buzz overhead. Drones do not sleep. And when drones do not sleep, neither do families. Children are kept indoors for days at a time. Schools remain closed not by order, but by fear. For Russia's remaining troops, morale has collapsed alongside logistics. Intercepts released by Ukrainian intelligence indicate multiple cases of soldiers refusing orders to reposition within the city. Not because they oppose the mission, but because they have watched every previous movement end the same way. Kupiansk has become a place where orders are issued faster than reinforcements arrive, and where survival depends not on armor or numbers, but on whether you are seen. And in Kupiansk, everyone is seen. This is no longer an offensive. It is containment. A city turned into a trap where the front line runs through kitchens, stairwells, and abandoned classrooms, and where the cost is paid not only by soldiers but by the civilians trapped among them. What Kupiansk now represents goes beyond tactics or territory. It marks a psychological breaking point, one Moscow did not anticipate and cannot easily contain. For Russian civilians watching this unfold, Kupiansk is no longer a distant frontline name on a map. It has become proof that the state's promises no longer align with reality. For weeks, official messaging insisted the situation was stabilized. Yet, casualty notifications continue to arrive in small towns across Russia, often without locations, without explanations, and without bodies to bury. According to regional administrators in Western Russia, local registries recorded a noticeable rise in missing in action designations linked to the Kupiansk direction in January alone. These are not officially counted as deaths. They are unresolved absences. Families receive neither compensation nor confirmation, only silence. This ambiguity is corrosive. In previous phases of the war, losses could be absorbed by distance and abstraction. Kupiansk changed that. The scale is smaller, but the visibility is higher. Social media channels linked to soldiers' relatives show the same pattern repeating. Unanswered messages, last voice notes sent days earlier, then nothing. No rotations, no withdrawals, no replacements. Inside Russia, this has triggered a subtle but dangerous shift. The language has changed. Where earlier complaints focused on equipment or pay, discussions now revolve around abandonment. Not defeat, abandonment. Military bloggers who once amplified Kremlin narratives have begun openly questioning why units are left inside urban zones with no extraction plan. Several posts from late January referenced Kupiansk as a closed pocket, a phrase that carries weight in Russian military culture. It implies not just danger, but inevitability. This erosion of trust does not stay confined to soldiers. Civilian morale is being strained by parallel failures at home. Rolling blackouts, fuel shortages, and delayed medical services have coincided with news from Kupiansk, creating a feedback loop of anxiety. The message received by many Russians is not that the war is being lost, but that it is being mismanaged at every level. Kupiansk also exposes a deeper contradiction. The Kremlin frames the conflict as essential for national security, yet the outcomes increasingly undermine domestic stability. Every unresolved casualty, every stranded unit, every family left without answers chips away at the narrative of control. And control is everything in an authoritarian system. Historically, Russian leadership has relied on distance to shield the public from the true cost of war. Kupiansk collapses that distance. It shows how modern warfare does not respect borders between front lines and homes. When cities become traps and soldiers become static targets, the consequences ripple outward, into kitchens, classrooms, and clinics far from the fighting. What makes this moment especially dangerous for Moscow is not the tactical loss itself, but the precedent. Kupiansk suggests that similar zones could emerge elsewhere, each one amplifying the same questions. Who is responsible? Who is protected? Who is expendable? For ordinary Russians, the answers are becoming harder to ignore. This is how wars are not just fought, but felt. And once a population begins to feel a war as something imposed rather than endured, legitimacy starts to drain away quietly, relentlessly, and without the need for protest. Kupiansk may not decide the war on its own, but it has already decided something else: how this war will be remembered by those who were never meant to be part of it. Kupiansk not only leaves behind more than ruins and casualty lists, it leaves a wound that does not close when the fighting moves on. For Russian families, the damage is not measured in kilometers or maps. It is measured in empty beds, unanswered phones, and letters that never arrive. Mothers wait for sons who will never walk through the door. Children grow up knowing their fathers only through photographs and rumors. Not heroes, not martyrs, just names that quietly disappear from official records. This is the cruelty at the center of it all. A state that demands sacrifice yet refuses accountability. A war sold as protection that ends with civilians paying the price on both sides of the border. Kupiansk shows what happens when strategy forgets humanity. When survival is treated as expendable. When people become statistics, then footnotes, then silence. What should never exist is not just the kill zone, it is the indifference that allows it to continue. As this war grinds on, the question is no longer how many cities will fall. It is how many lives will be broken before the truth can no longer be hidden, before the suffering at the edges reaches the center. And when that moment comes, history will remember who ordered it, who ignored it, and who paid for it with everything they had.